Tom Crawford. I'm a pediatric neurologist at Johns Hopkins. So there's recently been interest, there's always been interest in a higher dose of Nusinersen for SMA, beginning really shortly after Nusinersen was approved at a single dose of 12 milligrams. So we conducted a study, a broad study of children and adults who have spinal muscular atrophy at a higher dose. This study involved 3 different arms. The first arm was a very small arm. It was just dose finding and safety in a small group of patients. But the most important one is the group B, which was a much larger cohort of infants with early onset or children with somewhat later onset of spinal muscular atrophy, and following them after the dose was initiated. And for that, we had comparisons both to established data from the enabling trials that led to licensing of the 12 milligram dose, but also a blinded study group that was within it at the standard dose. So we were able to compare both the standard dose and the higher dose in this study called DEVOTE. So there's some complexity about the way this was designed. The study was initially powered to compare the higher dose to the sham group that was established at the original studies of Nusinersen that led to its licensing. But there was also an important group that it compared it to a blinded group that was at the standard dose as well. And so we were using more sophisticated and potentially more sensitive ways of being able to make that latter comparison. So the results were actually surprising to me. I went into this study thinking there probably wouldn't be too much difference. I thought that the effect of Nusinersen was more likely than not already saturated at the 12 milligram dose. And I was actually pleasantly surprised to learn that there was a benefit to be had in a whole lot of the internal comparisons that were made, and suggesting that the higher dose indeed has more benefit than the standard dose. The first and most important one that I'm interested in is an immediate measure of the biology of spinal muscular atrophy. You might remember that this is a disease of motor neurons, and it involves the death and dissolution of axons. The most abundant protein inside an axon is neurofilament protein. When an axon breaks apart, it spills its neurofilament into the cytoplasm and into the interstitial fluids, and can be measured. And so we've known from earlier studies that very high levels of neurofilament in babies who are just born and succumbing to this disease are frightfully high. And it comes down rapidly with the initiation of the standard dose. What was really quite remarkable is in the comparisons to the standard dose, and also in comparisons to the matched dose from historical controls, it came down faster and further in comparison to the standard dose. That was the bit that I think of as important, because it says something about the biology of it. Now, outcomes for SMA involve, what can you do a year later? Those are really slow, and they're very messy. There's so many other factors that lead to how much a child can do or not do. But it's meaningful that we were able to show that the spilling of neurofilament protein was substantially, nominally significantly better with the higher dose. One of the unexpected other outcomes was that it's very hard to do this study. In the developed world, most babies are treated now at birth from newborn screening, so there aren't a lot of children to be recruited that are found because of symptoms. And so Biogen had to open study sites around the world. Now, all of those sites had met the standards of care and being able to manage the symptoms of SMA. But many of these kids were really weak at the time of their recruitment. And I'd kind of forgotten that those babies die, even if they do well, because they're starting off with profound weakness and difficulties breathing and eating and all these sorts of things. So it was in this study that we still had deaths. And remarkably, the number of deaths in the high dose had a trend to better survival than the number of deaths to those babies that got the standard dose. That was mostly surprising to me because I forgot about the fact that these groups of kids are still very vulnerable in the third world, where standard of care is good but not universal. There was a third group that involved the full range of individuals with SMA who've been receiving Nusinersen for an average of, I think it was 4 years at the standard dose, and they were given the opportunity to get the higher dose, just transition to it. This was something that many adults with SMA are saying, I feel like it's running down, I want more, I feel like more would help. And I have to say, I've long thought that that might be a placebo effect or something. But what's interesting is that amongst those adults who got the higher dose, there actually was improvements in motor outcomes that I didn't initially think was going to be there. Whether it's significant or not it's not statistically significant, but it was meaningful, and interesting enough, it sustained over time, suggesting it wasn't the placebo effect. So the other really cool thing about this study is safety. We've known that the standard dose of Nusinersen has been very safe, that the number of adverse events is really down at the baseline, and nothing greater with a higher dose. That's probably the most important bit on this. With that proviso, knowing that there seems not to be, that there's strong evidence that there's no downside to a higher dose, and the possibility from these various kinds of outcomes that suggest that it's better, I'm enthusiastic about giving a higher dose. I know that Biogen's interested in going to the FDA to enable licensing of the higher dose, and I don't know how long it will take, but I will certainly be enthusiastic about giving that higher dose when it's possible. You know, there's one other byproduct of this study that I'm enthusiastic about, and that's that we have to move into more sensitive and novel biomarker outcomes to be able to improve upon the remarkable changes. Once you've given a drug like Nusinersen or the other SMN enhancing agents, and we've changed SMA from a, you know, I love this word, ingravescent, a disease in which is inevitably downhill. We now have people that are living and have a future with SMA, and that's just extraordinary. But that offers a new challenge. How do I improve on that? What do I do that makes it better? And we're going to have to get used to and qualify and get the FDA and prescribing public to be comfortable with biomarkers that show that we're doing better, because the number of patients we need to recruit will never be able to show the more subtle marginal differences that I expect we can do. This is one example of that. I think we have, we're not done with SMA. We got more stuff to do, and I'm enthusiastic that this is the way to go forward. I'm incredibly lucky to be standing in front of this study, being able to present all the data that was going on. There's a lot of folks who've been involved in it. One of the groups that I don't think is getting the credit that it should, and it has been extraordinarily important to the entire clinical science of SMA, is the initial cohort that was randomized to placebo. Those babies and children basically paid for essentially all of the study's progress by both Biogen and the other competing groups by providing the standard against which we now show this particular benefit. We owe an amazing debt to them. I like to call them our fallen warriors in this battle.